I realize that I don't think I've put this up on Schoology yet, but I will do that as soon as this class is over. I am handing you a list of the tissues with the representative location and functions that I want you to know. I realize that's what you did yesterday in your lab, was look at those. But there were some that weren't super clear, and there were some that, frankly, I didn't like. So I changed it. For the most part, I used the picture pieces, and you'll see them as we go through them today. But certainly the very first one I changed. I want to make sure you see that on the list. Simple squamous epithelium, I did not have as being, what was it, the stomach? Yeah, the cirrhosis of the small intestine. No, I changed that. And I made it the air sacs, the alveoli of the lungs. That's your classic example of this. I don't know why they didn't use that one. So make that change if you would. So again, on your test, which is coming Thursday, right? This is what I will test you upon as far as any of the functions and representative locations. Does that make sense? Yes, ma'am. Do you have to know the? Yes, ma'am. They're all fair game. Yep. They are all fair game. All right. My goal today is I don't want to spend oodles of time on the tissue pictures, because that's what you did all day in lab yesterday, as well as what we'll spend a good bit of time tomorrow doing. Again, looking at the tissues again. So we'll talk about them briefly, but I want to focus more on the other parts of the study guide that you and I did not get a chance to spend much time with yesterday. Did anybody not get a study guide or need another copy of said study guide? That is up on Schoology. That's been up there since Friday. Okay. So, remember our 4 types of tissue? Epithelial, connective, nervous, muscular, right? We talked previously about the germ layers, the ectoderm, the endoderm, the mesoderm, and what pieces come from those. Again, a good something to be comfortable with. Our epithelial tissue, its functions is protection, secretion, excretion. Remember, secretion means I produce something for the body. Excretion means I get it out of the body, right? Absorption, filtering, and sensation. Those are my functions for epithelial tissue. You learned all about the different types of epithelial tissue. Our simple squamous, which again you can see here. I don't want you to know the serosa of the small intestine. I want it to be the alveoli of the lungs. So that way, but they both allow rapid diffusion. With just one little layer of cells, it's very easy for things to go in and out, right? And again, there's lots of other pictures that are present for them. Use the PowerPoints that's on Schoology. I put the same PowerPoint up there because there's a lot of good information there. There's just not enough time for us to go through every single piece. Simple cuboidal, right? This is in the kidney tubules. Again, secretion and absorption. That's what this is all about. Thin layers of tissue. We keep moving. We're at simple columnar epithelial. Simple columnar is the mucus of the small intestine, the mucosa, not the mucus, but the mucosa, that lining of that small intestine. And what's the point of that simple columnar? Absorption. It absorbs the pieces. Okay, which makes sense. In the intestines, its whole job is to absorb, right? Get nutrients from the outside. As we keep going, we get that pseudo-stratified columnar epithelial. Again, pseudo means false. Stratified means layered, right? So it's falsely layered. It looks like it's layered, but it's not actually layered. And these guys have these big blobs here. Remember what those are called? Goblet cells, right? Again, think of the fancy, you know, my pinky is extended, I'm going to drink my wine. But it's a goblet full of what? Mucus. Ew, even worse than fat, right? Because those goblet cells produce mucus. That's their job. And the pseudostratified is there. in the mucosa of the trachea. Again, where you breathe in, which makes sense. We want there to be lots of mucus there. We want that cilia to help move that mucus back up so you can cough it out. We keep moving to the stratified epithelial. We begin with keratinized stratified squamous epithelial and non-keratinized. There's two different versions, right? The keratinized has the protein keratin. Keratin makes it stronger, makes it waterproof, really. And again, I think it's a very good thing to think about that tissue on your heel. That's the tissue that we deal with when we deal with keratinized stratified squamous. I forgot to take lunch, so let's go quick. And sorry if you're listening to this, you're going to have to wait as I do this. Who wants lunch? Today is grows and fries. All right, I guess I'll start with you, Camelia. Casey got you. Carlos got you. Nathan. Lily, I've got you. Josh got you. Gary got you. Anybody else? That's it? All right. Do you need a study guide too? All right. Okay, sorry. Back into our keratinized stratified squamous. Are you comfortable? The main reason why we want this keratin to be present is because this tissue needs to be tough. It's got to be abrasion resistant, right? Because again, we're walking on this tissue all day long, right? So it's got to be nice and tough. Another place that this tissue is also found, these stratified squamous, the non-keratinized, let's go to that quick. That's going to be in the tongue, the oral mucosa, the esophagus, the vagina. Again, we want multiple layers, right? Because again, there's going to be things passing through here. There's going to be things going by, and we don't want just one little thin layer that, that extra firm poopy is going to cause some problems to. Are you with me? So this is a good thing. You want thick. I had a professor in PT school. We were talking about tissues, and he said, imagine, because tissues are so specific. They have good functions, and they're made certain ways, right? Imagine if the sensitive tissue in your eye was surrounding your anus. Ow, right, that would not be fun, right? So again, the point being, tissues have functions. Are you with me? And their structure shows those functions. This looks like it's a whole bunch of cells in one place, right? Cool. Well, therefore, things can slough off and come off. There can be movement. There can be friction, and it's not going to cause a problem. Right. So we'll talk much more about that when we talk about the skin itself. But yes, that whole layer on top is basically dead. The blood vessels are in the connective tissue below it. There's no blood vessels in these epithelial tissues. So then any nutrients have to work their way up. So as it grows from the bottom up, and those cells get pushed up, and eventually, you're right, they're dead, basically. The skin you see on other people is all dead cells. Kind of weird, but true. I'm going to guess that this time, probably, I don't know which side is the apical and which side is the basement. But usually they get more flattened as they go, so I would say probably this side, the left side, is the dead part. It is.
Here it says it's living.
Yeah, it is mostly in the keratinized. I will say that is correct. I'll slide this back up here this way. Excuse me. So that would be these guys on this end up here, right? That the cells become much flatter and scaly as you move up. Yes?
Wait, so since they're like all
Yes, from the bottom and pushes them up. Yep, exactly. All right, let's keep rolling. Stratified cuboidal. We find these guys in the ducts of the sweat gland. And again, their job is they're secreting the sweat. They're producing that sweat, as well as many other things. Again, they're in the testicles where the sperm is produced. They're in the ovaries where the ovarian hormones are produced. So there are other places. I don't want you to think this is the only place that they are in the chart I gave you, but these are the ones I want you to be familiar with. Transitional epithelium, I think this is like the coolest tissue in the whole body because it's stretchy. Like it purposely is elastic. And the main place, now they show you in the picture, the kidney, I changed it to the wall of the bladder. It just makes more sense there, right? And now the ducts from the kidneys do stretch as well, so this tissue is involved there. But the bladder, you can just kind of see that, right? Bladder is normally like a little limp balloon, right? And then as it fills with urine, it expands. Once it reaches a certain point, it triggers to your brain, hey, I need to go to the bathroom. Make sense? So it literally can stretch, which I just think that's awfully cool. All right, so that's through the epithelial tissues. Into the connective tissues now. Lots of functions for connective tissue. It's binding the organ, it's supporting, it's protecting, both physically and with immune system protection. And it also provides movement and storage for the fats. Heat production, transport, lots of functions for the connective tissue. Some pieces of the connective tissue, because we gave you some detail about the things that make up the connective tissue. That you have, there is literally a bug that flew into my coffee. Isn't that exciting? Could just get a little extra protein this morning. Oh, that's very sad. Sorry, that was a bit of a non sequitur there. Cells. Let's talk about the cells. There's 6 different ones here. The fibroblasts, I just love the names of these things. A fibroblast, what does it sound like they do? They blast fibers, right? So these are the things that make the connective tissue fibers. They produce the fibers. The macrophages, these guys are what eat things, right? To phage something means to eat. The phagocytosis, right? Remember, you're eating something. So these macrophages are large things that eat. They engulf and destroy bacteria. Leukocytes is your fancy name for white blood cells. You all have heard of white blood cells before, I'm sure. These are your immune system pieces, right? These guys attack against bacteria and toxins and foreign agents, not like people from another country. Amar, Mrs. Banks wanted to see you. Good, excellent. Plasma cells. Plasma cells produce antibodies. What are our antibodies? Do you remember? Okay, sure, these are part of your immune system, right? So these are the things that attack these foreign cells that come into our bodies as well, a whole nother system. And those are produced by the plasma cells. Mast cells make 2 things, histamine and heparin. Has anybody ever heard of histamine before? I bet you all know antihistamines. What do we use those for? Allergies, right? So this is the cell that causes the irritation that allergies are the manifestation of. Does that make sense? And then heparin. Heparin is the stuff that makes your blood clot. So actually, heparin inhibits the clotting of the blood. Are you with me? So your blood wants to clot normally, right? If I make a cut in your skin, thankfully, very quickly it starts to close up, right? It starts to clot. The blood does. Heparin inhibits that. Because we don't want you to have blood clots all the time, right? Are you comfortable? This is one of the very interesting things. Your body needs to clot only at very specific times, right? Do we know what we call a blood clot that happens in your brain when it's not supposed to? We call that a stroke. You know what we call a blood clot in your heart that's not supposed to be there? A heart attack. In your lungs, you know what we call a blood clot that's not supposed to be there? A pulmonary embolism. Maybe you've heard of this before. Okay? These are bad things. Blood clots are bad things unless you're cut. Right? If you're cut, bleeding, okay, yeah, blood clots are a very good thing. Are you with me? So there's this whole system in place. It's literally thousands of steps to keep your blood from clotting at times it shouldn't and to allow it to clot when it should. Question, quick. Sure. It could be caused by too much of this, absolutely. There are many other things that could have gone wrong, but that could be one, certainly. Sir? Mm-hmm. There are some pieces that we can, but it's more that your body recognizes this as being a foreign substance and it responds to it. And if you have allergies, your body in particular, a certain type of allergen causes a larger response than it should. That's the basic pieces behind it. Right. There are ways you can gradually get your body used to it. There are shots and things you can do for that. It just depends on some allergies it works well, some it really doesn't. Sir? Right, so a blood clot in your leg is a fairly common place for it to start, but then it can move other places. Because it's a long journey from our legs back up to our heart, and especially if you're sitting for a long period of time, the blood just wants to pool and not go back up. So usually blood clots in your legs aren't a real problem. The problem is those clots could very easily come apart and go somewhere else. Again, your brain, your lungs, your heart. These would all be very bad things. If it was too bad, if the clot would never break up, you could lose your leg because the circulation would be cut off, right? But that's kind of the worst case scenario for that. Are you with me, friends? The last piece of our cells for the connective tissue are the adipocytes, which is a fancy name for a fat cell. Adipose tissue, right? Fat cells. Yes? Right, exactly. So these cells in various concentrations and various amounts are what make up all the different types of connective tissue. Yep, good question. Not only are there cells, there are three types of fibers for this connective tissue. You've got the collagenous fibers. Remember you're having collagen put in your lips, so your lips are nice and puffy and beautiful. I don't know, it's weird. Okay? But that is a protein, right? It's one of the most abundant proteins in the body. And that's tough. It's stretch resistant. Things like your tendons and your ligaments are made up of this collagen, mostly. We'll talk about that in a minute. The reticular fibers, these are very thin collagen fibers. The elastic fibers, these guys are stretchy. So a combination of the cells and the fibers are what make up these connective tissues. So let's jump into them. Oh, there is a ground substance as well. I just mentioned it briefly. You don't have to know much about that. That's just the in-between places. Yeah, the matrix, sure, that's another name for it. Okay, so here's our first of our connective tissue. This is the areolar tissue. Areolar tissue, very loosely organized, right? And where is that? The spread of the mesentery. So like the in-between. The mesentery is this tissue that overlays the intestines. You'll see it when we have our cats, that will basically open up the skin and there'll be this whole web of fatty stuff on top that you literally like pull off like a blanket, and then there are the intestines. That's the mesentery. It's bringing blood flow to the intestines so you can get rid of all the nutrients. It's highly vascularized. And the in-between places, that's where the areolar tissue is located. We do. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Why does it have to be? Honestly, I said a cat, but we probably actually, if I'm going to go on the last 2 years, I've not been able to get cats other than just a couple of pregnant cats. And we use fetal pigs instead. So we'll see. I haven't put the order in yet. Last year I put the order in like in November, and they said, yeah, they'll be ready in July. I was like, well, we're out of school at that point. They do. Yeah, that's the whole point. I want you to see that piece. Yeah. They are. They are actual connective tissues. It seems weird, but they are. Well, the fetal pig would come, because this is a pig that's not yet been born yet. This is going to be something, again, with the meat industry, they're not going to use that, so they use them from there. The cats often have been ones that have been put down because nobody's claimed them from an animal shelter or something like this. Does that make sense? But they're not killed simply because we put the order in. Oh, we need some cats. Hey, go get them and kill them. No. No. It's a good question. All right, next tissue is the reticular tissue. This is, again, a mesh of these different fibers, the reticular fibers and the fibroblasts, and these provide frameworks. So like the lymph nodes, the piece that I put here is the spleen, which is another one of the lymph organs. They're kind of forming the framework. These are very squishy, very not very solid kind of organs, the spleen is. You'll see again when we deal with our dissections. Our dense regular connective tissue, doesn't that just look strong? With all of those cells, all those waves put right together like a nice mesh. These are what tendons and ligaments are made out of. Tendons connect muscle to bone. Ligaments connect bone to bone. In case you didn't know the difference between those guys. So we want those to be nice and strong. Tendons connect muscle to bone. So my quadricep muscle attaches onto my knee to kick it out, right? That's a tendon right here. Ligaments are what attach bone to bone. So my ACL, my anterior cruciate ligament, comes from the back of my knee up to the front that keeps my knee from moving forward. When I plant my foot, I just don't go flying forward. It holds those bones in place. That's a good question. I think the bone itself can take more force, but these actually allow some stretching and some movement. So the bone can absorb more force, yes. It's harder to break a bone. But in actuality, you'd be better off breaking a bone than you will a ligament. A ligament will not repair itself. It has to either you just deal with it, or you have to have surgery to have it replaced. A bone will heal. A bone will heal. There is not. You can strengthen the muscles around your ligaments, but you can't actually affect those ligaments, no. If you stretch them out too far, yes. I have ligaments in my ankles. I've torn a number of them, and so I just will occasionally fall over. It just happens. It just happens. I'm walking along, oh, okay, no, I'm good, I'm good. Yes?
How would they,
Yeah. So they can, let's take ACL for example. They can take a cadaver ligament, like take the ACL from a cadaver and put it in you. They can take your hamstring tendon, one of the hamstring tendons, and make it the ligament. They can take the middle third out of your patellar tendon right here and make that your ligament. There's not enough blood. That's the easy answer. Theoretically, but it just doesn't really work that way. But yeah. Let's keep going, my friends. Here's our dense irregular connective tissue. This is in the dermis of your skin. So the outer layer is our nice stratified squamous epithelium, and then below that is our nice dense irregular connective tissue. And this is what's making up our skin. Epidermis on top, dermis on the bottom. Adipose tissue. So this is basically the storage site, right? Adipose tissue is where we store this excess energy that we've eaten, right? So if we eat more than our body uses on a given day, it's going to store it. How does it store it? As this adipose tissue. Okay? So they said, particularly in the breast, this subcutaneous, but really it's all over our bodies, this subcutaneous fat, below the surface. That's what subcutaneous means, right? Yes, sir? there's a lot of nerve endings that are there. Yeah, so no, it is a very sensitive part. Yeah. Yeah. No, right. Yeah, it is certainly. It is not the most sensitive by any means. Yeah. I didn't make it, so I can't answer you that. It certainly is helpful, again, for because the breasts have functions, right? They're actually being used to supply milk to this baby, right? So you want to make sure that you have enough sensation there that you know the baby is in the right spot and actually getting the milk that it needs. So there is good reason for it. Yeah. Okay, let's keep moving. For our connective tissues, we also have cartilage. And there's a couple of different types of cartilage that you'll be comfortable with. The first is called hyaline cartilage. Hyaline cartilage is like bone cartilage. It's almost bone, but it's still cartilage. So this is very firm, very, very strong cartilage. And the example we gave here are the little rings that are inside the lungs or the trachea to basically hold open the airway. Are you comfortable that the esophagus, which is where your food goes, is just a flat tube, right? Until you put food in it, then it expands, right, to let things go by. Your airway, we need to stay open all the time. A flat tube wouldn't work well for you to breathe. So therefore, it has these cartilage rings that holds it open. Does that make sense? Yeah. And you can even feel them on your neck, depending on, again, how thin you are. But as you move down, you can feel that there are little rings. And on our pig or on our cat, you'll see them very clearly. You can feel them. Elastic cartilage. Did I just tell you the wrong thing there? No. Elastic cartilage, again, for whatever reason, they have this picture in of the epiglottis. I don't even know what this picture is from here, because epiglottis is not even what they're pointing at. But what I gave you instead was the external ear, like this. This is elastic cartilage. Okay? Strong, yes, but also flexible. Like we can move this all over the place, and it bounces back very nicely. Okay, sure, right. The end of your nose is definitely cartilaginous. Yep, that same elastic cartilage. Sir? Because each tissue needs to perform a different function. And so basically, we'll give the type of cells and the fibers that needs to give it that specific function. Yeah. Sir? Up until about right here, yes, it's the same tube. But then you have this thing called the epiglottis that basically covers the tube going to your lungs when you swallow. Absolutely, yeah. That's what it means when you choke, right? If you drink and then you start coughing, you've gotten fluid into your lungs. No, you can cough because of that, sure. Yeah, because those two tubes are the same, right? From your nose back into the back of your throat. That's all one area, yes. But below about right here, where your Adam's apple is, that's where your epiglottis is. An epiglottis will close one tube and open the other. Right? Normally, your airway, your trachea is open, and your esophagus is closed, where the food goes. When you want to swallow, we want the esophagus to open and your trachea to close. Make sense? And the epiglottis is basically the gatekeeper that does that. But sure, people can actually die. Pneumonia is where you get fluid into your lungs. You can get what's called aspiration pneumonia, which is where you get food or liquid into your lungs. Yeah, and it causes quite a bad infection because, that's not supposed to be there. Yeah. Okay, let's keep going. Fibrocartilage. We're on the back page of your study guide now. Fibrocartilage is this cartilage that makes up the discs that are between your spine, your intervertebral discs. And these guys are impressive. They are very strong because they want to take the compression forces of you standing or sitting all day long, all your entire life. Have you seen how some people get shorter as they get older? Again, because of gravity, man, it's just like always pushing you down. such a downer, right? It's always. And I mean, we had a family friend, we called her grandma, but which wasn't actually my grandma, that she started out as 5'6" as an adult. And because, not just because of her disc, but also because she had very bad osteoporosis where the bones break down, she ended up about 4'9" in the end. She was like just all curled over. And again, because of the compression of her spine. Yes? Not really. I mean, her body basically lost some of that height. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, both. Yes, she got curled, so that made her shorter. But also, just that space between the vertebrae actually gets smaller. Some people who have back problems, your discs can be a part of that. Because there's actually nerves that come out between your spine. And if those nerves get pinched, that causes a pain and a problem. All right, let's keep going. Bone. Bone is a connective tissue. The question was asked, is bone and blood really connective tissue? Yeah, it is. It's weird to think of, but it is. These little guys here, can you see these look like tree rings? That's always what I think of when I see bone. Like here's the center of the tree, and then here's the rings that go around it, right? It's like a bunch of tree trunks put together. These are called osteons. Those cells of the bone tissue. Blood is actually a connective tissue, right? With its own special kind of cells that are there, but it is a connective tissue. Nervous tissue, pretty straightforward. That nervous tissue sends signals, right? It's for communication inside your body. And we'll talk way more about neurons when we get to the nervous system. Any question on those tissues? Oh, three more. Sorry, I forgot muscular tissue. Can't forget muscular tissue. We have skeletal muscles, or some of the slides were labeled striated muscles, right? Which is the same thing. They're striped. This picture, you can see it even better, right? The nice striped pattern. That's a very classic skeletal muscle look. The smooth muscle, I'll go to that next. Smooth muscle, no stripes, right? They look like little tiny fishes swimming together, right? Like smashed into a little pod together. And your cardiac muscle is a combination of those two things. So cardiac muscle has some striations to it, but it also kind of looks more like the fish. It's not so compact and regular as striated muscle or skeletal muscle. They also have these things called intercalated discs. And again, this picture shows these little blue guys. So not the nuclei, but like this right here, or this right here, or this right here. Those are called intercalated discs. And it's a classic way you can tell a cardiac muscle from a skeletal muscle. I haven't 100% decided. In the past, yes, I don't think you all have enough time to be that comfortable with these guys. Because usually I give two separate tests. There's one where you have to know the pictures, and the other one is actually all the functional pieces, all the stuff that's on here. But there's not enough time. So I think I'll focus more on the pieces that are on the study guide, yes. But again, I do want you to be able to identify them. That's why we're doing the lab. So we're spending time in the lab. Yes?
So for the tissues, for the most part, if you know the representative location and the function, we're pretty good?
You got it. Yep, you got it. You got it. Which, of course, is the main part of what this is. There's a few other pieces, but it's the main part. Okay, stand up for me. Let's do a little stretching. We've got about 12 minutes here. Whew, I've talked for a long time. It's a lot more talking than I like, Sean. A lot more talking. Because we've gotten through our tissues. Oh, I forgot I took my gum out of here. It's all right. Are you ready? Whew. Yes, ma'am. Why do we feel the need to stretch? Because our body doesn't like to be static. Like we like to move. Because blood pools, muscles get tight. There really isn't, no. Every position you have to end up changing at some point because it's putting pressure on some tissues. So you're just trying to move around the stress on your body. All right, let's keep rolling, my friends. There's a whole section in 5.5 on cell junctions. You maybe noticed it's not on your study guide. Don't worry about it. Are you comfortable that cells actually touch each other? Cool. Okay, let's move on. I'm sorry. I'm not a histologist. I'm like, really? Do we really care about this? I really don't. So let's move on. Let's move on. Glands are important. Okay? Glands are things that secrete, right? Either secreting something for the body to use, or they are secreting things to get out of the body, to excrete them, right? And you've got two types of glands, exocrine and endocrine. Endocrine should ring a bell with you, right? Endocrine system, right? There's a whole system about these glands. Exocrine system are glands that have a duct that maintains contact with the surface of the epithelial. In other words, you're actually secreting it out to the surface of a tissue. So it could be your sweat gland, right, that's actually secreting sweat outside your body, right? But it could also be your pancreas glands that are secreting things into your pancreas itself, which is a bunch of little tubules that then carry that stuff into your body or into your digestive system. We'll talk much more about that. But the point is that it's not secreting directly into the bloodstream. Okay? It's secreting onto the outside surface of a tissue. Not necessarily outside your body, but to the outside surface of a tissue. Whereas endocrine glands, these guys are secreting these hormones, what they produce, directly into the blood. Does that make sense? That difference between, and again, the names give it away. Exo means outside, right? Endo means inside. Okay? And some things do both, right? Some glands will do both. We're not worried about those, but there are some that do both. There's a whole piece on structure of these different glands. I'm not asking you to know them. There are 3 different types of exocrine secretion: merocrine, apocrine, holocrine. Again, I'm not interested in you knowing the differences between these guys. I just want you to know about glands and about endo and exocrine glands. The difference is how the cell is actually produced. The merocrine gland just secretes the thing directly. No part of the cell is harmed. The apocrine actually pinches off a piece of the cell and it goes off. And then holocrine means actually the cell dies. And as it dies, it becomes this thing it's secreting. Holocaust, right? A holocaust is a whole bunch of people dying. Holocrine, same root, right? Cell dying to produce this thing. Again, you don't have to know these. I'm just telling you they will come up in the future. Our membranes, again, I want you to know the definition. What is a membrane? Well, it lines the body cavities and the surrounding viscera, the surrounding inside organs. You can almost call it the leftovers. It's all the tissue stuff that really don't serve any huge purpose, other than to protect and to differentiate the different pieces of our insides. Okay? And there's a number of these different tissues, and again, your textbook lists a whole bunch of them. The mucosa membrane, or the mucous membranes, right? The serous membranes, or the serosa, this is the internal membranes inside that covers your organs. There's lots of pieces. Again, your textbook talks about them. I'm not interested in you knowing the list of all the different membranes that are listed there. You don't have to know that list. I just want you to know what a membrane is. And again, you'll see them as we go through our different systems. 6 minutes. I think we can do this. This is good. We did a lot of stuff today, and I apologize, but I want you to have time to do the lab piece. That's what I think is one of the more important pieces. This, I think, is pretty straightforward. It's just the information understanding it. Let's talk about tissue growth and development and repair and degeneration. Are you comfortable that tissue grows in 2 ways? Either hyperplasia or hypertrophy. Hyperplasia means the cell multiplies. I start with 1 cell, it becomes 2. 2 become 4, 4 become 8, 8 becomes 16, etc., etc. Right? Mitosis. Are we cool? That's what we've been talking about, cell hyperplasia. Cell hypertrophy or hypertrophy means the cell gets bigger, right? Think about somebody who works out, right? The cells aren't necessarily multiplying. You are adding some fibers. This is not a perfect illustration. But the muscles get bigger, right? So therefore, this would be hypertrophy, things getting larger. Your neurons are a great example of this. It's really the same neuron that goes from your brain all the way down to your foot, but as you grow, that neuron has to grow with you, right? Otherwise, like the middle of your thigh would be where your toes, it wouldn't really work that well. Question? Yeah.
So it's like you're growing, the muscle is growing. So
Yeah.
isn't that mean it's still something?
I hear what you're saying, and that's why I use that analogy that it's not perfect. It's not really even a great analogy, but the thought is you have a muscle that's just getting bigger. That's what I want you to take from that. Okay? So yes, it is multiplication as well. In the gym, actually you building muscle, you are adding muscle cells as well. Yes. Does that make sense? But my point is that it's just getting bigger. A pre-existing cell, something that's already there, is getting larger. That's what we call hypertrophy. Are we cool? How does that tissue develop? Well, it does something we call differentiation. Differentiation means I become specialized. Are you comfortable that is the entire point of you going to college? Is so you become specialized in something. I wanted to become specialized in helping people recover from surgeries and accidents, so I became a physical therapist, right? I had to take some general classes, right? I had to do history and math and philosophy and English, right? But as I went on, my degree got more and more specified till all I did was take classes about helping people get better. Does that make sense? That's what differentiation means. Your cells start out as stem cells. Stem cells can become any cells. They're undifferentiated. And then they gradually become more and more specialized. So maybe they first become a nervous tissue type cell. But in the nervous tissue, there's not just neurons. There's also glial cells. There's support cells that help that. So it keeps getting more and more differentiated. Once it gets down to that neuron can't then change to become a heart cell. Does that make sense? But a stem cell could become either a heart cell or a nerve cell. Does that make sense? We'll talk a little bit more about those as we go. Let me just finish this and then I'll get your question, I promise. To repair, there's a nice diagram that's there on page 169 that lists these steps for repair. And again, the textbook does a great job of this in that diagram, as well as these slides make it very clear. So you cut yourself, right? The tissue is bleeding. We want that blood to clot, right? The mast cells, the damaged cells that are actually broken, they release histamine. That dilates the blood vessels and gets more blood there. You say, wait, we want more blood? Yes, because we want that blood plasma that has antibodies and the clotting proteins. We want that stuff in your cut. So that's step 2, a blood clot can form. When that blood clot forms, there's also a little scab on top that seals the wound and helps prevent infection. And then macrophages start going to work, and they digest the broken tissue, the cells that have actually been torn and hurt. We've got new capillaries that come into this tissue, and we start taking that clot and we start putting more blood vessels and more fibroblasts. What do fibroblasts do? They blast fibers. They make more fibers, these connective tissue fibers. So it starts filling in this cut with this fibrous tissue, right? Sometimes it does actually grow more epithelial tissue, but oftentimes it gets just connective tissue, and we call that scar tissue, right? It looks different than your normal tissue. And that healing of that wound can take up to 2 years. Which sounds crazy, but it's true. The tissue is not at its strongest until almost 2 years after you cut it. Again, we're talking about for large cuts. If you just make a paper cut, it'll take 2 years to heal. Okay? It's all about levels. It's all about depth you're dealing with. The last thing I want to mention is the degeneration. Atrophy means shrinking, which would be the opposite of hypertrophy. Necrosis is when you have some sort of problem. Premature cell death is not supposed to die yet, but it does. And apoptosis is the actual programmed cell death. You're supposed to die at a certain time. Cells don't live forever. They go through this natural cycle of death, just like we talked about in the last chapter. Okay? Whew. That's a lot of stuff, Carlos. A lot of glassy eyes. And I apologize. I wanted to make sure you had heard this. Okay? The bell has rung. We'll do some more questions tomorrow. All right? Don't forget early tomorrow, 8 o'clock. Adios.